Hand over your keycards, your laptop, and your client access tokens right now, Howard. Julian sneered, sliding a single-page termination document across the polished dark walnut table of the executive conference room. You've been redundant for years, riding the coattails of this firm. As of 9 o'clock this morning, your services are no longer required. I looked at the young man sitting across from me. Julian Mercer was 38 years old, tailored in a $3,000 suit, and had been appointed managing director of Apex Enterprise Management exactly 18 months prior, courtesy of his uncle on the board. Beside him sat Bradley Thorne, 34, his newly minted vice president of business development, who couldn't suppress a triumphant smirk. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice or slam my hands on the table. At 52 years old, with 22 years of continuous service building, this firm from a 6-person boutique advisory into a regional heavyweight, I simply picked up my Mont Blanc pen, signed the bottom line of the acknowledgement sheet, and slid it back. Understood, I said quietly. I stood up, smoothed down the front of my navy blue suit jacket, reached into my pocket, and tapped a 5-digit confirmation code on my personal phone screen, revoking the master encryption key that authorized Apex's access to the proprietary client portal. Then I picked up my leather briefcase and walked out toward the elevator bank, leaving Julian and Bradley chuckling in the glass-walled room behind me. They thought they had just pulled off the ultimate corporate coup. They thought they had eliminated a senior partner with a massive salary and successfully inherited a $108 million annual recurring revenue portfolio. What they didn't realize was that they hadn't just fired an employee. They had just severed the single structural pillar keeping their entire company afloat to understand how 2 executive ladder climbers could make a mistake that would cost their firm over $100 million. In less than 30 days, you have to go back to 2004, when I first joined Apex Enterprise Management. 22 years ago, Apex was a struggling mid-market consultancy operating out of a cramped 3rd-floor suite in downtown Chicago. When the founding partners hired me at age 30 as a senior portfolio architect, the firm held less than $12 million in total enterprise contracts. The business model was fragile, reliant on short-term project fees and high client turnover. I spent the first 8 years of my career restructuring how Apex handled major enterprise accounts. I realized early on that Fortune 500 companies don't buy corporate consulting from a brand name. They buy risk mitigation and operational trust from specific individuals who understand their internal mechanics. Over the next decade, I personally brought in and nurtured 3 massive cornerstone accounts that transformed Apex into an industry giant. Titanium Federal, a defense logistics contractor, Vanguard Aerospace, a commercial aviation systems provider, and Starlight Maritime, a global shipping container network. By 2012, Apex was preparing for a major corporate recapitalization to secure institutional credit lines. To appease nervous lenders who feared that Apex's entire valuation rested on my personal relationships, the board agreed to a specialized corporate governance structure. Every major master service agreement with Titanium Federal, Vanguard Aerospace, and Starlight Maritime was redrafted under a legal framework known as Clause 14B, a key man assignment and exclusivity covenant. Under Clause 14B, these 3 enterprise accounts were formally contracted through Vance Key Client Holdings LLC, a personal liability entity I had established with full board approval. Apex was designated as the operating service subcontractor, receiving 85% of all contract billings, while my entity retained ultimate contract ownership, intellectual property rights, and key person performance guarantees. The contract specifically stipulated that if my personal employment or key person management role at Apex was terminated without cause, or if Apex attempted to assign the accounts to another partner without client consent, the clients held the immediate unilateral right to cancel their master agreements within 30 days without financial penalty. Furthermore, in 2018, I spent 2 years developing a proprietary automated portfolio tracking and real-time compliance portal designed specifically for these 3 massive clients. Instead of assigning the software patent to Apex, I registered U.S. Patent 10,845, 921 under Vance Key Client Holdings LLC, and leased the operational API access to Apex on a revocable month-to-month license for a nominal fee of $1 per year, provided I remained in charge of portfolio management. For 14 years, this arrangement worked seamlessly. The original founders of Apex understood the value I brought to the firm. By 2024, Apex's total annual recurring revenue stood at $180 million. Of that total, my three key accounts generated exactly $108 million, representing 60% of the company's entire revenue base. Titanium Federal accounted for $48 million, Vanguard Aerospace for $36 million, and Starlight Maritime for $24 million. My annual compensation was structured around a base salary of $350,000, paired with a 4% enterprise portfolio performance fee, which equaled $4,320,000 annually. I was the highest-earning partner in the firm's history, and every dollar of my commission was backed by audited client cash flows that kept 200 Apex employees payroll cleared every single month. Then, 6 months ago, the original founding chairman retired, and the board appointed Julian Mercer as managing director. Julian was fresh out of an executive MBA program, full of buzzwords, and obsessed with short-term margin expansion to boost his own equity compensation. To Julian and his close ally Bradley Thorne, seeing a 52-year-old portfolio director draw over $4 million in annual fees was an eyesore on the balance sheet. They didn't care about legal structures or 22 years of client history. In their mind, the clients belonged to Apex, the contracts were ironclad, and my role was an expensive historical relic that could easily be replaced by Bradley for a fraction of the cost. They began plotting my removal 3 months ago, slowly restricting my access to executive committee meetings and rerouting internal client communications through Bradley's sales team. I watched their move silently, keeping my head down, documenting every policy breach, and quietly preparing my legal response with my corporate attorney, Arthur Vance, no relation to me, but the sharpest contract litigator in the Midwest. When Julian called me into the boardroom that Tuesday morning, he thought he was cutting off an overpaid veteran. He had no idea that he was pulling the pin on a financial hand grenade that had been wired into the company's foundation for over a decade. The friction between Julian Mercer and me reached a breaking point during the quarterly financial review 3 weeks before my termination. Apex had been negotiating a credit facility extension with a major syndicate of institutional lenders. Julian was eager to present a flawless balance sheet to impress the board of directors and position the firm for a lucrative private equity buyout. To make the firm's EBITDA metrics appear 25% higher than they actually were, Julian and Bradley Thorne had come up with a reckless accounting scheme. They created an internal financial projection that recorded $20 million in future option extensions from Vanguard Aerospace as recognized revenue for the current quarter. The problem was that Vanguard Aerospace had not signed the option renewal. In fact, their vice president of procurement, Marcus Sterling, had explicitly told me that the renewal was contingent on our upcoming annual cybersecurity and software audit, scheduled for the end of the fiscal year. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, Julian called me into his office on the top floor. The room was sleek, filled with glass whiteboards, modern art, and a panoramic view of the skyline. Bradley was standing beside Julian's glass desk, holding a thick leather-bound binder containing the quarterly compliance report. "Howard, sit down," Julian said, leaning back in his executive chair and sliding the binder toward me. "We need your signature on Section 4 of the compliance audit. We're submitting the final debt covenant documentation to the syndicate bank at 5 o'clock today." I opened the binder and flipped directly to Section 4. My eyes scanned the line items. Right there, listed under cleared operational income, was the $20 million unexecuted option for Vanguard Aerospace, along with a $15 million unverified expansion projection for Titanium Federal. "Julian, this is inaccurate," I said, setting the pen back on the desk. "Vanguard hasn't executed Clause 9 for the option year yet. The procurement committee doesn't meet until next month. If we report this as booked revenue to the lending syndicate, We are violating federal acquisition regulation standards and filing false financial statements to institutional creditors. Bradley scoffed, stepping forward with his hands in his pockets. Come on, Howard. It's a formality. Marcus Sterling has been your personal friend for 15 years. You know he's going to sign the extension. We're just accelerating the booking timeline so we can hit our quarterly targets. Don't be so rigid. It doesn't matter if Marcus is my friend or a stranger, Bradley, I replied calmly, looking him dead in the eye. Accounting rules don't change based on personal relationships. Booking unexecuted options as cleared revenue is fraud under SEC Rule 10b-5 and 41 U.S.C. 4712. If the federal compliance auditors flag this during their annual review, Apex will face immediate contract disqualification and severe civil penalties. Julian's face flushed red. He slammed his hand onto the desk, rattling his espresso cup. Don't lecture me on compliance, Howard. I am the managing director of this company. Your job is to manage portfolio administration and sign off on the numbers we give you. Bradley built this projection framework with our outside financial consultants. Who do you think you are, questioning my executive authority? I am the senior portfolio partner who personally negotiated every word of those master service contracts, I said, keeping my tone steady and even. And as long as my signature is legally required on the compliance schedule, I will not sign off on falsified earnings figures. You think you're indispensable around here, don't you? Julian sneered, leaning over his desk. His eyes narrowed with hatred. You think, because you've been sitting in this office for 22 years, that you own this place. Let me tell you something, Vance. You're an overpaid dinosaur. You take $4 million out of this company's profit pool every year, while guys like Bradley are doing the actual work of building our future. Bradley hasn't closed a single account exceeding $500,000 since he joined, I pointed out quietly. The entire portfolio that pays for this floor was built by my team. That was the line that sealed my fate. Julian stood up, his chair rolling back against the wall. We're done talking. Leave the binder on the desk and get out of my office. For the next 2 weeks, the atmosphere in the office became toxic. Julian and Bradley began systematically isolating me from daily operations. They instructed the IT department to copy all files from my network drives to Bradley's server. They sent memo notices to the operational teams for Titanium Federal and Starlight Maritime, announcing that Bradley Thorne would be stepping in as the primary executive account sponsor to streamline corporate communications. I didn't panic. I knew how fragile their understanding of enterprise management was. Enterprise clients don't like sudden executive shuffles, especially when they aren't notified by the person who built their operational trust. On Monday afternoon, 3 days before my termination, I logged into our payroll portal to review my mid-year compensation distribution. My 4% performance fee for the preceding 2 quarters, totaling $2,160,000, was marked as pending administrative hold. When I emailed payroll, they informed me that Managing Director Julian Mercer had personally frozen the payout, citing an internal audit review of account overhead expenses. They were deliberately trying to squeeze me out, hoping I would resign in frustration so they could claim I breached my employment contract and walk away without paying my accrued performance fees. When Tuesday morning arrived, Julian summoned me to the main conference room for what he called an emergency portfolio alignment meeting. When I walked in, there were no operational directors or account managers present. Only Julian, Bradley, and a corporate security guard standing near the door. Howard, Julian said, skipping any pleasantries, the executive committee has decided to restructure the enterprise portfolio division. We are eliminating your position effective immediately to optimize operational overhead. Here is your severance agreement. We are offering you 3 months of base salary in exchange for a full release of all commission claims and a non-compete agreement. He pushed the paper across the table. Attached to it was a letter waiving my $2.16 million in pending performance fees and forfeiting all future claims against the firm. And if I refused to sign this waiver, I asked, then you are terminated for cause due to gross insubordination and failure to cooperate with corporate compliance guidelines. Julian spat, a condescending smile touching his lips. You walk out of here today with zero severance, zero performance fees, and Bradley takes over your entire portfolio before lunch. I looked at Bradley, who was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, wearing a smirk of pure arrogance. He truly believed he was about to step into a turnkey enterprise empire and claim millions in commissions for work he had never done. I picked up my pen, struck out the entire severance waiver, signed the simple termination receipt confirming my last day of service, and handed it back to Julian. "I'll take the termination for cause," I said smoothly. "Hand over your keycards, your laptop, and your client access tokens right now, Howard," Julian ordered. I handed over my corporate laptop and keycard. Then, reaching into my jacket pocket, I withdrew my personal smartphone. With a single swipe, I opened the cloud console for Vance Key Client Holdings, LLC, and revoked the master encryption key that allowed Apex's network to communicate with the enterprise portal servers. "Security will escort you to your desk to collect your personal belongings," Julian said dismissively. "You have 15 minutes to leave the premises." I stood up, adjusted my tie, picked up my briefcase, and walked out without looking back. As security walked me down the marble hallway of the executive floor, past whispering colleagues and silent secretaries, Bradley called out from behind me, "Don't worry about your clients, Howard. I'll take real good care of them." I didn't answer him. I just stepped into the elevator, descended to the parking garage, and smiled as the heavy glass doors closed behind me. I sat in the quiet interior of my sedan in the underground parking garage, looking up at the polished steel elevators of Apex Enterprise Management. I took a deep breath, letting 22 years of routine fall away, replaced by a sharp, focused sense of clarity. I picked up my personal cell phone and placed a call to Arthur Vance, my lead corporate litigation attorney. Arthur had been managing commercial contract disputes in Chicago for over 30 years and knew every line of Apex corporate history. "It's done, Arthur," I said as soon as he answered. "Julian Mercer fired me 15 minutes ago for cause. He tried to force me to sign a release, waiving my $2.16 million in accrued performance fees." Arthur let out a low, dry chuckle over the line. "Did he actually think you would sign it?" "He did," I replied, "and he put Bradley Thorne in charge of the account management team. They revoked my internal network credentials, but I deauthorized their API token access to the master client portal server before I walked out." "Excellent," Arthur said, the sound of rustling legal documents audible over the phone. "I have the pre-drafted notice packages sitting right on my desk. Within the next 2 hours, my process servers will deliver 3 distinct legal filings. First, a formal notice of bad faith termination and demand for immediate settlement of your $2.16 million in unpaid earned fees, plus interest under Illinois wage enforcement statutes. Second, a formal cease and desist notice to Apex's board regarding U.S. Patent 10,845,921, revoking their operational software license for the master client portal effective immediately." "And the third?" I asked. "The third is the real payload, Howard," Arthur said smoothly. "Official legal notice served directly to the chief legal officers of Titanium Federal, Vanguard Aerospace, and Starlight Maritime. The notice formally informs them that Apex Enterprise Management has terminated your key person employment without cause, officially triggering the 30-day keyman breach notice and unilateral contract revocation clause under Section 14B of their master service agreements." "Good," I said. "Let the 30-day clock begin." After hanging up with Arthur, I drove straight to a private office suite I had leased 2 months prior in downtown Chicago under the name Vance Enterprise Advisors LLC. It was a modern, sunlit office equipped with secure high-speed servers, dedicated encrypted conference lines, and a small team of 3 senior operational analysts who had left Apex quietly over the past 6 months after seeing the writing on the wall. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, the first legal notices had hit the desks of Apex's corporate legal team and executive board. But the real structural collapse began at 9 o'clock the following morning, when the operational managers at Titanium Federal, Vanguard Aerospace, and Starlight Maritime tried to access their daily portfolio dashboards. When their logistics coordinators and procurement officers logged into the master client portal, instead of seeing their real-time freight tracking, compliance manifests, and billing ledgers, They were met with a stark black screen displaying a system message. Enterprise portal license suspended. API token revoked by patent holder Vance Key Client Holdings, LLC. Contact system administrator for licensing information. Within 30 minutes, my phone began ringing continuously. The first call was from Marcus Sterling, Vice President of Procurement at Vanguard Aerospace. Vanguard had $36 million in annual business routed through Apex, representing critical aviation supply chain monitoring across 12 international airports. "Howard, what the hell is going on over there?" Marcus demanded without greeting. "I just got an email from a guy named Bradley Thorne claiming he is our new executive sponsor, and that you retired abruptly due to personal health reasons. Then 5 minutes later, my entire procurement team gets locked out of the portal. My phones are ringing off the hook from airport directors." "Marcus, take a breath," I said calmly. "First of all, I did not retire, and my health is perfectly fine. I was terminated without cause yesterday morning by Julian Mercer after I refused to sign off on a falsified compliance document that improperly recorded $20 million of your unexecuted options as cleared quarterly earnings." There was a dead silence on the line for 3 full seconds. "He did what?" Marcus spat, his voice dropping an octave into pure ice. "That arrogant little idiot lied to our executive board. He reported unexecuted options as booked revenue to his creditors. I have the internal emails and draft compliance reports saved, Marcus," I said. "Furthermore, because my employment was severed without cause, my legal team has officially served Vanguard's legal department with a formal notice under Clause 14B of our Master Service Agreement. You are officially in a 30-day keyman breach window. You have the full legal right under federal acquisition guidelines to terminate your master agreement with Apex immediately without penalty." "Howard," Marcus said, his tone resolute, "Vanguard doesn't do business with Apex. We do business with you. My CEO is not going to allow a $36 million aviation contract to be managed by some executive's nephew who lies about accounting records and doesn't own the portal software. I'm calling our chief legal officer right now. We are freezing all pending invoice payments to Apex effective immediately." 10 minutes after hanging up with Marcus, I received a call from General Raymond Miller, Senior Procurement Officer at Titanium Federal, our largest account at $48 million annually. "Vance," General Miller barked in his crisp military cadence, "I just read the legal notice from your attorney regarding Clause 14B. Is this official?" "It is official, General," I replied. "Apex terminated my key person oversight yesterday morning." "Unbelievable," Miller grunted. "This Bradley Thorne character called my office an hour ago trying to schedule a meet-and-greet lunch. I asked him how he planned to handle our defense logistics compliance clearance without your personal security credentials, and the kid stuttered for 2 minutes straight before hanging up. Titanium Federal operates under strict Department of Defense contractor standards. We cannot have an unvetted corporate substitute managing defense supply manifests. I am invoking Clause 14B today. Our legal team is serving Apex with a 30-day notice of intent to transition the account." By 4 o'clock that afternoon, Elena Rostova, Chief Operating Officer of Starlight Maritime, had called as well. Starlight held $24 million in annual contracts with Apex. Elena was sharp, pragmatic, and had zero tolerance for corporate incompetence. "Howard," Elena said softly over encrypted line, "our maritime cargo tracking at 3 major ports is completely blind right now because of this portal shutdown. Apex's IT team called us trying to pitch an interim spreadsheet tracking system. I told them they were insane. Starlight Maritime processes 40,000 shipping containers a week. We don't use spreadsheets. I apologize for the disruption, Elena," I said. "If you sign a direct service authorization with Vance Enterprise Advisors today, I can restore your portal access within 15 minutes through my proprietary server infrastructure." "Send the contract over, Howard," Elena said without hesitation. "My legal team will have it executed before 5 o'clock." While I was quietly securing direct transition agreements with the 3 largest enterprise clients in the industry, 6 miles away at Apex's headquarters, total panic was taking hold. By Monday morning, 6 days after my termination, The executive floor of Apex Enterprise Management had descended into complete operational chaos. Without access to the master client portal, Apex's account managers were trying to manually track complex logistics supply chains, defense compliance filings, and maritime manifests using basic email chains and shared spreadsheets. Human error multiplied exponentially. Cargo shipments for Starlight Maritime were delayed at port terminals in Long Beach and Savannah, incurring hundreds of thousands of dollars in daily demurrage penalties. Defense logistics filings for Titanium Federal missed critical statutory compliance deadlines, triggering automated federal audit flags. Worse still, the syndicate bank representing Apex's major credit facility sent a senior risk team to Apex headquarters after learning that Vanguard Aerospace and Titanium Federal had officially frozen all invoice payments pending legal review. Over 60% of Apex's cash flow had vanished overnight. 200 employees were facing an immediate payroll default, and the company was in direct breach of its primary debt covenants. On Tuesday morning, my personal cell phone lit up with 14 missed calls from Julian Mercer. I let every single call go straight to voicemail. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Julian sent a text message that sounded almost pathetic. "Howard, please call me immediately. We need to sit down and resolve this operational misunderstanding. The board is getting involved." I waited until 3 o'clock to return his call. "Howard, thank God you picked up." Julian shouted into the receiver, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and panic. "What the hell are you doing? Vanguard, Titanium Federal, and Starlight Maritime have all served us with 30-day contract termination notices, citing some absurd keyman clause. And our IT department says you locked us out of the portal software." "I didn't lock you out of anything, Julian," I said coolly. "I simply revoked the temporary revocable API token license owned by my personal entity, Vance Key Client Holdings LLC. As for the client notices, those were issued directly by the corporate legal counsel of those 3 Fortune 500 entities after learning that you terminated their designated keyman without cause and attempted to submit falsified compliance documents to your lenders." "Listen to me, Vance," Julian screamed, trying to regain his dominant corporate posture. "You are an employee of this firm. All intellectual property created during your tenure belongs to Apex. You signed an employment agreement. If you don't unlock that portal and tell those clients to withdraw their cancellation notices by 5 o'clock today, we will sue you for breach of fiduciary duty, trade secret theft, and tortious interference." "We will ruin you, Julian," I replied calmly. "I suggest you check the corporate governance archives from 2012 before you file a lawsuit you cannot win. My attorney, Arthur Vance, has already delivered certified copies of U.S. Patent 10,845, 921, and the original Clause 14B key man agreements to your board of directors. If you want to talk, I will be in the main executive boardroom at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. But I won't be meeting with you alone. I will be meeting with the entire board of directors and your syndicate bank representatives." The following morning at 10 o'clock sharp, I walked into Apex's executive suite wearing my navy suit, carrying a sleek leather folder. The atmosphere in the grand mahogany boardroom was suffused with heavy tension. Sitting around the long table were 8 members of the board of directors, 3 senior representatives from the institutional bank syndicate, and the firm's chief legal counsel. At the head of the table sat Julian Mercer and Bradley Thorne. Julian looked disheveled, his eyes bloodshot, his collar unbuttoned. Bradley sat beside him, pale and staring silently at his laptop. "Thank you for joining us, Howard," said Richard Sterling, the lead independent director on the board, a silver-haired former CEO who had known me for 2 decades. "We are facing an unprecedented crisis. Over $108 million in enterprise revenue is currently frozen. Our primary client portal is dark, and our bank syndicate is threatening to call our credit lines. Julian tells us that you are holding the firm hostage using unauthorized software locks." I walked to the head of the table, set my leather folder down, and looked directly at Richard Sterling. "Richard, members of the board," I began, my voice clear and steady, "Julian Mercer has lied to you. He did not fire an overpaid, redundant employee. He deliberately attempted to force me to sign a falsified quarterly compliance audit that falsely inflated EBITDA figures by $35 million by booking unexecuted option years from Vanguard Aerospace and Titanium Federal. Gasps echoed around the table. The lead representative from the bank syndicate immediately sat up, staring hard at Julian. "That's a lie," Julian shouted, jumping out of his chair. "He's making wild allegations to cover up his corporate extortion." "I have the original draft compliance report right here," I said, opening my folder and sliding certified copies across the table to Richard Sterling and the bank representatives, along with printed email strings from Julian and Bradley demanding that I sign off on these numbers to satisfy your debt covenant review. When I refused to commit federal accounting fraud, Julian terminated me on the spot for cause, canceled my $2.16 million in earned performance fees, and handed my accounts to Bradley Thorne. Richard Sterling flipped through the documents, his face hardening into stone. He turned his eyes toward Julian. "Julian, is this your signature on this demand memo?" Julian opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Sweat was beaded on his forehead. "Furthermore," I continued, sliding a second set of documents across the table, "Julian and Bradley failed to perform basic legal due diligence before executing my termination. In 2012, this board officially authorized Clause 14B in every master service agreement for Titanium Federal, Vanguard Aerospace, and Starlight Maritime. Under Clause 14B, contract ownership and key person performance covenants reside with my entity, Vance Key Client Holdings LLC. The moment I was terminated without cause, those accounts automatically entered a mandatory 30-day client revocation window." I turned to look directly at Bradley Thorne, who was staring at his desk in utter shock. "Yesterday afternoon," I said, "the executive boards of Vanguard Aerospace, Titanium Federal, and Starlight Maritime officially executed their right of contract assignment under Clause 14B. They have formally severed their service relationships with Apex Enterprise Management and assigned all $108 million in annual contracts directly to my new firm, Vance Enterprise Advisors, LLC. The room went completely silent. You could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. $108 million, Richard Sterling whispered, leaning back in his chair, staring in disbelief at the signed client assignment letters. 60% of our entire company's revenue, gone in 7 days. That is impossible, Julian screamed, slamming both hands on the table. They can't do that. We'll sue the clients. We'll sue Vance. We own those relationships. You don't own anything, Julian, Richard Sterling said, his voice dropping into a dangerous, icy whisper. You just bankrupted this company. The board meeting didn't last much longer. After that, Richard Sterling immediately called for an emergency executive session. Before I even left the building, the board of directors voted unanimously to fire Julian Mercer and Bradley Thorne for cause, citing gross negligence, breach of fiduciary duty, and attempted accounting fraud. Julian was escorted out of the building by the very same security guard he had used to escort me out just 7 days earlier, weeping as he carried his personal items in a cardboard box. The board appointed Richard Sterling as interim chairman and managing director. Recognizing that Apex was on the brink of complete financial collapse, Richard called my attorney Arthur Vance within 2 hours to negotiate a formal corporate settlement agreement. The terms of the final settlement were uncompromisingly in my favor. First, Apex Enterprise Management agreed to immediately wire $4,320,000 into Vance Key Client Holdings LLC's escrow account. This covered my full $2.16 million in unpaid earned performance fees, plus an equivalent $2.16 million in liquidated damages for bad faith contract breach. Second, Apex executed a complete, unconditional release of all claims, explicitly acknowledging that Vance Key Client Holdings LLC held sole, exclusive legal ownership of the enterprise contracts for Titanium Federal, Vanguard Aerospace, and Starlight Maritime under Clause 14B, as well as total intellectual property ownership of U.S. Patent 10,845,921. Third, to prevent the remaining 40% of Apex's mid-market clients from collapsing due to software lockout, Apex agreed to pay my firm a monthly licensing fee of $150,000 for a 6-month temporary API access token to the master client portal, giving them time to build their own inferior internal tracking systems. Within 30 days, Vance Enterprise Advisors LLC was fully operational in our new headquarters, occupying the top floor of a premier high-rise overlooking Lake Michigan. When Titanium Federal, Vanguard Aerospace, and Starlight Maritime formally transferred their accounts to my firm, I didn't leave my former colleagues at Apex behind. Over the next 6 weeks, I hired 45 senior account managers, logistics architects, and compliance specialists who had worked under me at Apex for years. I offered them 20% salary increases, remote flexibility, and equity participation in Vance Enterprise Advisors. With their primary operational talent gone and 60% of their revenue wiped off the books, Apex Enterprise Management was forced into a fire sale merger 6 months later, absorbed by a regional competitor for pennies on the dollar. As for Julian Mercer and Bradley Thorne, their corporate ambitions crumbled completely. When news of the falsified accounting audit and the loss of the $108 million portfolio leaked throughout the financial sector, Julian's name became toxic among institutional private equity firms. The SEC launched a formal inquiry into his quarterly compliance filings, resulting in hefty civil fines and a permanent ban from serving as an officer of any publicly traded or SEC-regulated entity. Bradley Thorne was blacklisted from major enterprise sales, eventually taking a low-level commission job selling mid-market fleet software in another state. 6 months after walking out of Apex with my single box of belongings, I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new corner office at Vance Enterprise Advisors. Outside, the morning sun glinted off the deep blue waters of Lake Michigan. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from General Raymond Miller of Titanium Federal. Howard, third-quarter defense compliance audit cleared with 0 flags. Outstanding work as always. I smiled, set the phone down, and took a slow sip of hot coffee. In the corporate world, young ladder climbers like Julian Mercer often mistake title and authority for actual power. They think arrogance can substitute for institutional knowledge, and they assume that 22 years of quiet dedication can be erased with a single termination memo. But real power doesn't come from a corner office or a fancy title given by an uncle on the board. Real power comes from the trust of your clients, the ironclad precision of your contracts, and the quiet competence that keeps the entire machine running. When you spend decades building the foundation of a $100 million enterprise, you don't need to scream or fight when they try to push you out. You just hand over your keys, step into the elevator, and let the house cards fall on its own.